those guys do. Kawhi don't choke down the stretch.
Yeah, wake me up when Rondo doesn't let them choke.
I hope both of you are awake for a packed show, guys.
Okay,
Can we get this thing started? In the latest post-free agency power rankings, there are two familiar teams at the top. The Chiefs landed the top spot thanks to reworking their offensive line. And despite beating Kansas City in the Super Bowl, the Buccaneers landed at the second spot. And then in the NFC East, Dak Prescott and the Cowboys led the way at 18, while the Giants came in at 21, and the Washington football team landed at 22. So, Shannon, let's start here at the top. Do you agree with Kansas City over Tampa here?
Skip, when I look at it, I'm looking at, did the team improve? And if you look at what Kansas City were able to do, obviously their offensive line, especially in the Super Bowl, was a source of contention. It was a weakness for them. And they addressed that issue. They signed Joe Tooney. They went out and Kyle Long, maybe after that year and a half off, Skip, maybe it's done him well because he's a phenomenal player prior to him having these injuries. I think he had a shoulder injury, had an ankle injury. So they bring him back. Now they're going to get the opt-in, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. He comes back. Niang, he opts back in. So, Skip, I think from an offensive line, and I know people say, well, Tampa destroyed them. Tampa destroyed that version of Kansas City. I would have liked to have seen, and maybe the outcome is no different, I would have liked to seen the team that showed up in October or early November. I would have liked to seen that team with the offensive linemen, everybody intact, and then we play from there. But Kansas City said we have some issues. And also yesterday, Skip, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was Sunday, they signed Jaron Reed, who had a nice career in Seattle. 1 year had 10 sacks, another year had 8 sacks. Pair him on the interior with Chris Jones. Now, I still think maybe a linebacker, maybe a corner, but I like what they've done. I think they've addressed needs. Did Tampa get any better? That's the question. Did they get any better? And you said, well, they brought everybody back. Kansas City brought everybody back. It still comes down to injuries. If you get it, if you can stay relatively healthy, you have an excellent chance. But I just like what Kansas City was able to do, addressing serious needs, which is the offensive line was porous down the stretch, especially. If Assembly got hurt, you had the 2 opt-outs, both your tackles get injured, and so that was a shell of what we saw early in the season with Kansas City. But Andy Reid says, I don't want this to happen again on my watch. He addressed those issues. I like the Jaron Reed addition. Tampa re-signed all their guys. And we'll see if that pays off because the year before, Kansas City re-signed all their guys, and it didn't work out in the end. So I love what Kansas City was able to do.
You love what Kansas City was able to do, and you still think the Chiefs are better than the Buccaneers.
That wasn't the question.
Okay. Well, yes, it was. They're ranked first to Tampa second.
Better, hold on. Better as a team?
Well, should they be 1 or 2?
I put them at 1.
You put them at 1.
I put them at 1.
You're comfortable. They're a better team than the Buccaneers.
Because, Skip, it's kind of hard, like, where was the improvement that Tampa made? So, in other words, you're saying Tampa was so great, they were so overwhelming, they didn't need to make any improvements.
Okay. So, here's what I think about this. I'm going to remind everybody, for the final 3 quarters of the regular season game, albeit at Tampa between Kansas City and what I call Tampa Bay, the final 3 quarters, Tampa Bay won that game 24-10. Now, they ended up losing 27-24 because they could not stop Tyreek, who went off for 203 yards receiving in the first quarter. A nightmare of a disaster. But after that, they settled in, locked in. Brady started to figure out the defense, and here they came, and they won the last 3 quarters 24-10. They won the Super Bowl 31-9, and it was a flat-out butt kick.
Yeah.
So if I add up 24-10 and 31-9 over the final 7 quarters that these two teams competed with each other, the score was 55-19 in favor of Tom Brady's team, and that score haunts me because once upon a time my Oklahoma Sooners lost to the USC Trojans in the national championship game 55-19. But that is a complete and utter wipeout. And you cannot tell me that the Buccaneers aren't, as we speak, on paper, because they kept everybody.
Right.
You can't tell me they're not better than the Chiefs.
But Skip, did they improve?
Okay, here's the point that you're missing. Did they improve? Yes, that they did so because they had no subtraction. What happens in the age of free agency? Well, everybody loses a bunch of somebodies. You just can't help not lose a bunch of players. Let's just look at the Chiefs. What did they lose? They lost Le'Veon Bell, no big deal. But Williams was a big deal because he could have been the MVP of the Super Bowl 2 years ago.
Right.
They did lose Sammy Watkins, and you can scoff all you want, but he was at least a factor in their offense as the third or fourth receiver. And then they lost 2 offensive linemen that played in the shadows, and Austin Ryder and Stefan Wisniewski, the center, and then Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher were their 2 studs, and they just had to let them go because they were afraid of both of their injuries.
Skip, they weren't there in the Super Bowl.
Okay, but I'm just saying, Wisniewski and Ryder were there in the Super Bowl, and now they brought in Kyle Long out of retirement. Do you realize from 2016 to 2019, he managed to play 30 of 64 games. So 34 out of 64 he missed. He played fewer games than he missed. And you just suddenly brought him back after a year and a half out of retirement.
Yep.
And he was pretty awful in the few games that he played in 2019. The last game he ever played in his career was October 19th of 2019. And you're saying he's going to be a savior of your offensive line?
I believe a lot of that, Skip. If you look at him early in his career, when he was injury-free, he was a dominant left guard. He's one of the premier offensive linemen in all of football.
For what it's worth, in the 4 games that he played in 2019, he graded the 3rd worst offensive guard in football.
He was hurt.
Okay, all right.
You can't play this game hurt.
Okay, and so they go out and pay a ton of desperate money to a Joe Thuney that Belichick let walk. He franchise tagged him the year before, and then he said, you know what? There's no way he lived up to the tag. He graded the 10th best offensive guard in the year he was franchise tagged. And Belichick said, I'm done. I'm not even going to try because I'm going to splash my cash elsewhere.
Right.
So he lets Joe Thuney walk, and Kansas City is so desperate, they splash cash all over Joe Thuney, and I don't think he's that great. I don't think he's going to change lives.
So in other words, he's not an upgrade of what they had.
Well, maybe a slight, but what they needed was Trent Williams, and they came close. According to Trent Williams, it was a close call, but he remained in San Francisco. Well, you can't tell me that line is anywhere near as dominant as it was last year. It just isn't. And plus, he's completely rebuilt, and they're going to have to figure out new chemistry and unity and cohesion.
But the question is, will they be as bad as they were in the Super Bowl? That's the question, because that's what they're guarding against. Okay, yes, once Schwartz went out, once Fisher went out, the opt-outs, they had done a great job. But, Skip, remember, Osemele ends up getting hurt, who was playing really well at left guard. So now you got 2 guys inserted into the lineup that were going to be swing players. And then you had 2 guys that were playing guard that got bumped out to tackles that really can't be tackles. Skip, you remember Mike Rimmers against Carolina? Von Miller was Super Bowl MVP against Rimmers.
Yep. Okay. Well, he's back. Good luck with that.
Maybe he's better at a right. Okay. Maybe he's better at guard than at tackle.
So I thought Rashad Breeland was pretty good at corner last year. He was a starter, and he's gone.
No, he's not. He wasn't very good.
I thought he was pretty good, and Damian Wilson was a starter all year on defense for you, and he's gone. No. So you had loss. You had lots of losses, and you can't tell me it's just all about Patrick Mahomes because he didn't play very well in either of the Super Bowls that I've watched him play.
Skip.
So don't give me that, because here's the fact that you are avoiding right now. Since 1970, this year's Tampa is only the 5th team that has brought back all 22 from the year before.
Right.
And it's been since the 2010 Vikings in the era of free agency that anybody was able to keep all of their players.
Right.
The mere fact that they kept everybody is inconceivable. You bet against it. You thought it was impossible to keep all those players. So you say, how did they get better? Well, the point is they're the only team that didn't get worse on losses. You can talk about additions, but they were the best team easily. When we got to the Super Bowl, you had seen them march through Washington and New Orleans and Lambeau Field, and they were just clearly the best football team.
Let me ask you a question. Last year, how many people did Kansas City lose? On the Super Bowl team that won the Super Bowl against San Francisco, how many players did they lose?
I don't know. Till they going into last year?
Yes.
I don't know. We're not doing that topic, so I don't know. I didn't look at it.
That's my point, Skip.
Okay, well, what is your point? How many did they lose? I don't know. Help me out. Tell me how many.
They had the opt-outs.
Okay.
They had, Tardif opted out and Niang opted out.
All right.
And I think, you know what? And I think their running back opted out.
He did.
But if you look
Damian
at them,
Williams opted out.
Up until the injuries befell the offensive line, Skip,
Yep.
they were playing unbelievable. The way the Kansas City Chiefs are built, they're built like a lot of teams. If we have a dynamic offense, we're going to put points on the board, force you to make you become one-dimensional, then we could go headhunt your quarterback. Well, if we can't do that, if teams can run the football, or it's a nip-and-tuck ball game where you can't make the other team one-dimensional, Kansas City's defense wasn't that good even when they won the Super Bowl. It's always been about their offense. That's why they fell behind 24-0. That's why they fell behind 17-7. And what happened? Pat Mahomes got hot. He forced the other team. They took Derrick Henry out of the game, put the ball in Tannehill's hands, and he couldn't do anything.
Okay. So you said, wow, they signed Jeremy.